LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation, Cross Question, with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question here on LBC. We have with us on our panel, to my left, Justine Greening, founder of the Social Mobility Pledge and former Conservative Education Secretary. Next to her, Darren Jones, Labour MP for Bristol North West and Chair of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee. He had a bit of fun today on this committee. We'll talk about that a little later. Peter Bone, the Conservative MP for Wellingborough and former Deputy Leader of the House of Commons, and broadcaster and writer Nina Myskow. Now, lots of things that you might want to phone in about. You can obviously make your own decisions as to what your questions are. But I think we probably want to talk about some of the industrial action that's taking place. Maybe Nicola Sturgeon's threat to take the UK government to court over the Gender Recognition Act. The apparent division within Labour over transgender laws. Jeremy Clarkson being dropped by Amazon and possibly ITV2 after that Meghan column. And Greta Thunberg's arrest by police in Germany while protesting against a coal mine being expanded. But as I say, you can ask about anything you like. 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850 and you can use Alexa as well. Just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC and then just say your question and it'll pop up as if by magic on my screen. And you can watch us on Global Player.
0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
One thing I should say is if you ever miss an episode of Cross Question, you can catch up on the Cross Question podcast, which you can also find on Global Player. And you can watch us as well. All the episodes are stored there for your delight and delectation. Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Lewis in Nottingham. Hello, Lewis.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Very well, thank you. What would you like to ask?
Good. So I'd like to ask, how do the panel think we can use the money that's allocated to the education sector better?
Well, I'm going to obviously ask former Education Secretary Justine Greening on that one. I mean, in addition to answering Lewis's question, I mean, when you were Education Secretary, did you always find that a challenge to decide how to sort of slice up the pie?
It's really impossible because actually, whether you're looking at overall pushes like improving maths or more place-based approaches, we did opportunity areas that was investing additional money in certain areas. Finding that right balance is really difficult. And you can argue there is no perfect balance. But what I would say is in terms of how to make the money go further, I think it is now time to look at how you involve employers much more in those parts of young people's education that prepare them for careers, whether it's careers education and finding out about roles that are out there, whether it's some of the wider skills they'll need on team working, project management, creativity. I think if you are looking for more input into the education system that can make a difference, it's actually those things that employers want to see. And I'd like to see employers much more involved in the curriculum, frankly. I mean, look at maths. Iain, I don't know about you. I'm an accountant by training, but I don't think I used that much of my maths O-level. I was the last year of O-levels when I got into my career. And so Rishi Sunak's been talking about this issue of actually you need to make sure that it's not just how much we spend, but what we are putting children's time into learning is the right stuff.
But you see, a lot of teachers listening tonight will say, well, it's quite simple. We should put much more money into teachers, not just into salaries, but maybe extra training, whatever. You haven't mentioned that.
Well, I've got some sympathy for that because I do think the government's got a challenge on the labour market, quite literally. Literally, you can't buck the market. And the challenge at the moment for I think, teachers and the teaching profession is, I mean, I seriously thought about becoming a teacher after I stopped being an MP. So I really care passionately about social mobility and I wanted to put my time into improving opportunities. I absolutely think it's a profession that is...
And then you looked at the salary.
Well, I think I just decided to keep doing my social mobility campaign and work on that area. So I think the challenge is we're not meeting our recruitment targets for teachers. And in some key areas like maths, last year we only recruited 17% of the target.
So what was the point of Rishi Sunak saying, well, everyone's got to do maths up to 18 if they can't even recruit enough maths teachers for the current curriculum?
So two things on that. First of all, my view is the issue with maths is much more about what you're doing until you're 16, rather than the catch-up period at 18 and making sure that's relevant. And the second thing then is I think there does have to be some realism that in a very tight labour market, the public sector pay is going to have to stay competitive with the private sector. That's just the world that we are in. And that's a basic economics issue, not about whether or not you sort of want to pay teachers more or less. It's about being competitive on a profession that is crucial for the nation's future because it's helping to skill up and teach our children.
So, Nina Myskow, how can we make sure our education system is correctly funded and teachers are paid properly?
We change the government, of course. That's the only way.
Is it?
That's as simple as that. No,
so
course,
a Labour government they grant the teachers what they want, they grant the nurses what they want, etc.
No, but it needs a shake-up and it needs a rethink. My mother was a teacher, a science teacher, and a very good one, and had a very long career teaching in Scotland. And back in the day, teachers used to have real status and respect in the community, and pupils had respect for the teacher. I know we always, as kids, were terrible, but it's a hiding to nothing being a teacher today, because teachers have, in real terms, lost over 20% of the salary in the last 10, 12, 13 years. In the classroom, the children rule, it seems to me. And particularly if you're a male teacher, it's a very difficult profession to be in, because how do you discipline children? How do you maintain, there's the whole parent power thing. That all seems to me to be dreadful, and there's therefore the standard of people that, because of the lower salaries, the standard of people that we're getting into teaching don't necessarily rate that respect, all of them. I mean there are very, very dedicated teachers and vocational teachers, and that's being taken advantage of. It seems to me that the other thing that, we're talking about Rishi Sunak saying, well, everybody should learn maths till they're 18, blah, 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 blah. That to me seems a complete nonsense. That's actually ignoring the wonderful creative and humanity, the humanities and the creative side and the artistic side that we so rightly are proud of in this country. But what I'd like to see, frankly, is the percentage of pupils who leave primary school and who are literate and numerate. I would like to see that go up, because it's an absolute scandal.
Well, it apparently has gone up, but,
yes,
you look at the proportion that get to 16 without having basic numeracy or literacy skills, and it is still far too high.
Well,
so you're right.
It's outrageous. It's outrageous. So to be talking in an airy-fairy way, well, let's.
So you'd put more money into primary education,
yes,
to make sure that sort of that's where people do get the best education,
yes,
that they can. Okay,
absolutely.
Darren Jones.
Well, not to be too geeky, but I would like to see us spending more on technology in the classroom so that we can deliver a more personalised education to pupils at the right rate of progress for pupils, to help teachers deliver the most optimal content to individuals in the class. But actually, there's a broader point, I think, to the question that was raised that we don't talk enough about, which is the education of adults. It's not just about children in school. There's a huge amount of work to be done about lifelong training and skills in the workplace. I think it's a huge part of our economic problems in this country. And when you compare how much we spend on, I think they call it active labour market policies at the OECD, I think we spend about 5% of GDP, and the average is something like 20. I just tried to recall those off the top of my head, but I think that's about right.
Can't be 20.
No, well, it was much higher than we were. Look, we did this on the committee a few weeks ago, and forgive me, I can't quite recall them, but it was about that difference. And so I think, we should be looking much more about how we support people when they're in work, having to learn new skills as the economy changes, as people's jobs change, more about technology again, more about data. You're seeing how the economy is changing in the UK, whether it's in manufacturing or services. And I'd like to see the government playing with business more of a role in helping our adults to continue to have lifelong learning as well.
But isn't Nina right that it needs to be done at the other end? If you get primary education right, everything flows from that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Justine will know probably better than I will, but the data shows that early years, preschool plus primary school investment is really, really important in terms of reducing the inequality gap of outcomes in children across the country. And if you can help every young person when they get older to fulfil their potential more fully, I think that would be a good thing for the economy.
Peter Bone.
Well, like Justine, I am an accountant. I went to a comprehensive...
No one's perfect, Peter.
I actually do think it's a very noble profession. I almost as noble as being a member of Parliament. Went on to went to comprehensive school. Then I changed to a grammar school. Got A levels. Didn't go on to university. I effectively did job training, chartered accountant. And back in the major years, I know how long ago was that, I was campaigning for this. When you get to 16, there's a lot of children that don't want to do exams and don't want to be in classrooms, but are very happy to go and do work and learn and get certificates and move on. And my company at that time, we did a lot of work on that. But I'm not sure that's really ever moved on. We've gone on this idea that everybody needs to go on to university. So the one thing I do is look much more at the vocational training. I think it really, really helped. And some of the people that did the basic thing went on to be civil servants or managing directors of companies. It wasn't that they weren't bright, it's just that they didn't want to be in a classroom and do exams.
What about the teachers' dispute? Because part of the question was, how do you make sure teachers are paid properly? Teachers' pay in real terms has gone down over the last few years, like a lot of different sectors. Do you think teachers are paid adequately at the moment?
Well, first of all, I disagree with Nina. I think teachers still have a lot of respect. Members of my family are teachers, and I think they're respected, and they do a job which they want to do. It's a vocational job, and they need to be paid properly. But you came against the same problem, Iain, that every public sector wants more money because of the economic situation we're on with inflation. And how you deal with that is a problem that the government's got to tackle, because you can't say, well, I'm going to give all this money to the teachers, and then say, well, what about the nurses? What about the doctors? It's really difficult. And I think what they have to do is try and strike a fair balance. But I actually do think that teachers are extremely important. I still think they're very valued in society.
But they're being offered 5%. They want 12%. There's going to have to be a compromise, isn't there?
Of course. And that's what will happen. And, every strike shouldn't happen because the employers and the unions should compromise. But what happens? They don't. And then in the end, they have to. It always seems to me a complete
Justine,
waste
when you're
of time.
Education Secretary, did you experience this, sort of having to have these kind of battles with the teaching unions, who I think probably in those days were rather more radical than they seem to be now?
I have to say, I didn't feel I did have big battles with the unions. When I went into that Education Secretary role, I got them in and basically said, look, I know we're bound to have some disagreements, but if we can at least agree that's not going to stop us from working together on the things we can agree on, then that's got to be a win. And the other key thing for me was saying to them, look, I never want us to have a disagreement just because we haven't understood one another properly. So from my perspective, I felt I saw them relatively regularly, and I never wanted to be hearing from them when something had gone wrong. And so it was about having a grown-up relationship with them and, finding issues like working on social mobility that I knew they cared as much about as I did. As Peter was saying, is hugely vocational. And I just think you've almost just got to recognise that there's an important question around teacher pay that needs to be resolved. But in the meantime, I was at school in the 80s. I lost some of my time due to teacher strikes back then. And I think the big challenge is it's children and young people's education has already been disrupted in COVID, now being disrupted even more. And the sooner we can find a resolution to this, and I think it will have to be some kind of compromise, the better, because we can't afford any more lost education.
Right, we'll move on to another subject in just a moment. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to call if you'd like to put a question to our panel. It is 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Let me reintroduce you to my panel. Justine Greening, former Education Secretary, founder of the Social Mobility Pledge. I'll ask you a bit about that in a second. Darren Jones, Labour MP for Bristol North West and chairman of the chair, I should say, I suppose, of the. That previews our 8 o'clock hour in our use of language. Chair of the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee. Peter Bone, Conservative MP for Wellingborough and former Deputy Leader of the House of Commons. Now, that was a relatively brief stint you had in that job, Peter. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, because the only job I would have taken, which was to try and get government to work properly with Parliament. And I went round all the different ministries pointing out what they should be doing, and we just got that ball rolling when somebody realised I was still Deputy Leader of the House and decided let's abolish the role. I think they'd forgotten I was there.
Does that exist anymore?
No, so I wasn't sacked, they just got rid of the role.
Made redundant.
And Nina Myskow is here, broadcaster and writer. Right, our next question is a text question from Nick, who says, Royal Mail, I think, is a critical part of national infrastructure. The fact that many homes only get mail every 2 days and often even less is a huge cause for concern. Is now the time to discuss renationalising it and investing in this service and its staff? Well, before we go to the panel, here's a little bit of Darren Jones grilling the Royal Mail boss Simon Thompson today about a poster which Royal Mail employees are being told to read at the start of their shift about the company's priorities.
Letters are ranked number 4 in the priority list, and only half of them. So you're unilaterally only delivering on 50% of your USO, aren't you, Mr. Thompson?
I'm actually aware of that particular correspondence, which was done in one delivery office, and it was dealt with, and it was a local action.
This isn't true. Who wrote this poster, Mr. Thompson?
That is absolutely not our policy.
Well, it's on a Royal Mail poster that your workers are being asked to read when they go to work. If that's not Royal Mail policy, how else do you communicate Royal Mail policy?
That is absolutely not our policy.
I'll remind you, Mr. Thompson, that misleading Parliament is not something that we appreciate here on the committee.
Oh, get him.
Smack legs.
I watched a bit of that committee hearing because we often talk to Dave Ward, the CWU leader, on my programme. And of all of the people on strike at the moment, I must say I have most sympathy with the post office workers. And you heard why from his performance in that committee today.
Yes, I try not to get too irate with our witnesses, but if you're appearing before a Parliamentary Select Committee, you're there to answer questions, and he basically spent the whole of today trying not to answer questions, and I don't think that maybe did him justice or what he wanted to get across to us, to his workers, to the markets today, and I just don't think that's the right way to conduct yourself when you're appearing before a Parliamentary Committee.
Going to Nick's question, I mean, he suggests that Royal Mail should be renationalised. Now, that would presumably cost quite a lot of money.
Well, presumably. I mean, Royal Mail have actually split their business into... So, I mean, if you roll back, 10 years, Post Office and Royal Mail was all one business. Then Post Office was split from Royal Mail. And then Royal Mail has now been split again into 2. So you have like an international parcels business, which is very profitable, and then the letters business, which is really not very profitable at the moment. And Royal Mail are obliged to deliver our letters 6 days a week for a set price, irrespective of where you're sending it across the country. My argument to the CEO today was, why can't you cross-subsidise between the two? This is like the buses. You know, bus companies will say, we can only run the profitable routes, so we're going to close the non-profitable routes. And then people often in low-income areas then have no buses, and then the companies come to us as the taxpayer or the Treasury and say, can we have some taxpayers' money, please, whilst they're taking dividends out of the profitable bit of the business. I think there has to be change at Royal Mail, clearly, and they might want to think about how they align these
But if he had been answering the question honestly, he would have said, well, my job is to make a dividend for my shareholders, so obviously I'm going to maximise the profit that I can make, and that means that I concentrate on the successful parts of the business.
Yeah, well, he should have said that.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked him today how his bonus is calculated, because they actually just changed the rules. I mean, 2 years ago, it was based on service level delivery and performance. You know, are you getting the letters delivered? Are you getting the parcels delivered? And Royal Mail, the board, changed it purely to be based, as I understand it, on how much dividends you give to shareholders. And so when Royal Mail dished out hundreds of millions of pounds in a special dividend last year, which led to a £140,000 cash bonus for the CEO, it makes you question, well, shouldn't that money have actually gone back into the business? Were you doing that really because you're incentivized to do that for your own personal gain?
Isn't the fact of the matter that the Royal Mail management are fattening up the business or thinning out the business, ready for a sale to a private equity company?
So there are private equity companies circling around the profitable bits of Royal Mail. Royal Mail have also been trying to persuade ministers to change the legal obligations around letter delivery. So you might only get letters in the afternoon 2 or 3 days a week. And some private companies are starting to increase the amount of ownership that they have. But of course, this is a national piece of national infrastructure. If you can't get your letters from your GP or your hospital, if you can't get information from, the HMRC or the government, or whatever it might be, then there are going to be problems there. We can't just allow Royal Mail to be fattened up, broken down, sold off to the highest bidder, because we'll lose a key bit of the national infrastructure in doing that.
Peter Bone, is your constituency mailbag full of complaints on this subject?
No, it's not. But doesn't it show the benefit of a select committee? You can get people in there, you can grill them, and you can get to the truth. They have parliamentary privilege, so they can say what they actually believe. And I have a lot of time for our postmen and postwomen. And the one thing the government should not do is back down on this universal. You have to do it Monday to Saturday.
Isn't that outmoded though?
No, I don't think it is.
And it's not the case in some other countries.
No, but I think they've got this benefit of being Royal Mail. That's the what you have to do in exchange for that. And actually, to be fair, during COVID, it was really well run. You remember those little letter boxes? If you put your test in or whatever, it will be delivered the next day and all that. But we need a service where it comes every day. I'm beginning to think, where I live, it seems to nothing comes one day and I get an awful lot.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering what's going on there. And the government's got to look at that, because if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, we have to come down on them. I mean, I'm absolutely against nationalisation, because I think it'll probably get worse. But I think what you have to do is say, no, we're not going to change what you're required to do, but you've got to do it.
I mean, Justine, you were in government when Royal Mail was privatised. Vince Cable was behind that, and the ostensible reason was to attract more private sector investment into the system. Now, I don't know if that's happened or not, but something at the moment is clearly not working.
Well, it feels to me like there's been investment in some bits of it, but in the end, as Darren is saying, that hasn't strengthened the whole of it, which I think really would have been the whole point of doing the privatisation. But I think the other lesson from all of this is that in the end, when you have public services, actually, whoever runs them, they're accountable. And so I think...
Is there an off-post?
It's Ofcom, actually.
Ofcom can control it.
So I think that the challenge for...
Great people at Ofcom, obviously.
They're not bad, actually, compared to other regulators.
Obviously, we're regulated by...
Well, they've got a tough job, I was about to say. So I think there's a challenge for how the Royal Mail continues to invest, whether it needs to come back to some of its pricing. I mean, frankly, I was listening to the debate we're having, and I thought to myself, I'd be quite happy to, for me, if I could pay a smaller amount and just have a weekly... I could post something and it gets in the next 7 days whenever it's convenient, but like with so something probably even less fast than second class. I'd probably consider doing that, frankly. If I want to get something to somebody instantly, I tend to do an email. So I think there's probably a need for them to keep on innovating. But, we had 3 weeks without our mail. I was just saying to you before we came on air, I only got my mum's Christmas card last week. And I do think for us, that just our postman was ill. And it just got across to me, in a sense, how threadbare the service can get. And everyone was asking how he was. But, it was only when he got a bit better that we got our post. And that just doesn't feel like a sustainable service to me.
I hesitate to say that I got delivery of post this Sunday, which is unheard of. Nina?
Well, the particular area of North London where I live, we've always said for years we have the Bermuda Triangle of post. It's been an absolute nightmare. It's nothing to do with strikes. Nothing. It's just always been terrible. You could never guarantee. So, your birthday would turn up and you think, oh, I've been forgotten. And then suddenly 3 days later something would arrive or never at all. And something, did you get my birthday card? No. I mean, and I know that's compared to sort of like doctor's appointments. That's a rather frivolous thing. But do you know what I mean? The post is about all sorts of messages and greetings. It seems to me that if the basic aim of a service is to provide money for its shareholders rather than to produce the best service possible,
It should be able to do both.
Well,
That's
absolutely,
the point.
absolutely, but it is patently, obviously not. And the thing is, when COVID happened, how come the Royal Mail did not suddenly, in its parcel delivery, in leaps and bounds, make an enormous amount of money? Why, how come other companies came in? Amazon has taken over deliveries. Why? How come that hasn't gone to Royal Mail? What's wrong with the management that they couldn't have suddenly said, my God, people are stuck at home, they're going to need deliveries, and somehow done something?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you look at some of the private sector companies that have really cornered a lot of this market now, like Every used to be Hermes, who people really complain about. But, I mean, they are cheaper than Royal Mail, so people inevitably gravitate to them. And for all of the complaints, I mean, they provide a service which actually Royal Mail could provide if it was structured right. Darren.
Just to say that Royal Mail did make lots of money actually at the last couple of years, but they gave I think it was a £400 million special dividend to shareholders and a share buyback of their own shares. So they took hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds out of the business, having done quite well during those couple of years. Now they say that they can't afford to agree a pay settlement with their staff and that they're losing £1 million a day, I think.
Well, my point exactly, that they should not exist to provide money for somebody else. They should exist to provide the service that they're supposed to provide. I mean, that seems to me simple.
There's nothing intrinsically wrong about whether it's public sector or private sector, making money out of providing a public service. I think we've got to get out of this mindset
as long
that it's
as
wrong to make a profit.
Service works, and it obviously doesn't.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with regard to Royal Mail over the next few months and next year. Maybe you'll have Simon Thompson back next year and ask him to justify his £300,000 bonus for making a loss in the business.
Well, I think I have to write to Mr. Thompson after today because I've been inundated with emails from staff at Royal Mail providing me with quite a lot of evidence that some of the answers he gave today were perhaps not quite correct.
We will follow this with interest. Let us know what happens on that. We'll come to more of your questions in a moment. The lines are still open at 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30 on Cross Question. Let's get the news headlines from Charlotte Morgan.
The UK government has defended a move to block Scottish legislation for the first time since 25 years of devolution after the SNPs called the move undemocratic. Westminster's blocking the bill designed to make it easier for people to legally change the gender assigned to them at birth. The Home Secretary is being accused of a failure of leadership after the formal sacking of a police officer who yesterday admitted a series of sex offences, including 24 counts of rape. Suella Braverman's promising to tackle the problem within forces. Labour's describing her words as weak. And more than 70,000 staff across 150 universities are due to strike from the 1st of next month. It's the first of a further 18 days of industrial action by the University and College Union. LBC weather, heavy sleet and snow showers for Northern Ireland, parts of Wales and Western England, lows of -4. Some snow for North East England tomorrow with highs of 6 Celsius.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:34 on LBC. With us in the studio, we have Nina Myskow, Peter Bone, Darren Jones and Justine Greening. Now, Justine, you're the founder of the Social Mobility Pledge. You've been on LBC a lot talking about it. We've done some work together on it as well. How far has it got? Because you had a Prime Minister whose levelling up was one of his top priorities. Do you feel that it's going down the political agenda a bit?
No, I think it's continuing to be right at the top, and actually probably who wins the next election will be a lot about who the public think has got the most compelling, comprehensive strategy on it, and whether it's education and catching up after COVID, closing some of those gaps that open up on life chances right at the beginning of your life, or making sure you have fair access to opportunity. I think this is the most, alongside climate change, the most pressing challenge facing Britain, and we're not going to be successful in post-Brexit Britain unless we unlock the talent of all of our people, and that's what we have to focus our efforts on over the coming years.
Right, let's move on to our next caller. It's Stephen in East Grinstead. Stephen, hello, what would you like to ask?
Hi, good evening. Have the police been a law unto themselves for far too long? And can the government bring them back into line?
Nina Myskow.
Well, the thing is that what appears to have unfolded recently are these horrific tales. The Sarah Everard, the recent case today, and you think, well, how can this have happened? They are the police. How can this be allowed to continue?
Even more shocking than that, you've got 800 members of the Metropolitan Police being investigated for sexual crimes.
It's outrageous. But the thing is, the evidence has been building up over the last year or so that there's such a hotbed of kind of cliche, toxic masculinities, kind of a pack mentality. You know, these so-called bantering texts, they were absolutely repulsive. 2 policemen photographing the dead bodies of 2 sisters. I mean, just appalling things. And yet somehow, and other policemen must have known, their colleagues must have known, and yet it's allowed to continue. I find it absolutely impossible to understand how this has been allowed to fester. I'm going to say flourish, but it's fester. That's exactly what it is.
It's been allowed to happen because the senior leadership of the Metropolitan Police have allowed it, including the first female commissioner who knew all of this was going on and did nothing about it.
Well, that's outrageous. And thank God Sadiq Khan, I'm not an enormous fan of his, but he got rid of her. Thank goodness. And so Mark Rowley's got an enormous task on his hand. And I don't know where he starts. Where do you start? Because we don't have enough police. We don't have enough police of the right calibre. So when they're, you know, when the intake comes in, the bar seems to be set far too low. But then again, it comes down to pay, doesn't it?
And I don't know what it
does.
Comes
it come
down to.
Well, if they can't get enough recruits, the bar goes lower and lower, and then what do you end up with? This, and wasn't it Boris Johnson? How many did he dump? Actually, when he was mayor of London, how many police were dumped?
Actually, when he was mayor of London, the number went up.
Did it go up?
Yeah.
well, the number went up, but the bar was very low then.
Well, I can't give you the
well, come
figures,
on,
but I mean,
because we're seeing
under
the end product now.
You're right. The number of police officers all over the country went down by 20,000. It's now almost back up to where it was, but I mean that's not exactly a massive achievement.
But stuffing the post with people who are not suitable.
I mean, there was a thought, Peter Bone, that maybe the police are recruiting in the wrong areas, that they are recruiting maybe too many people who've left the armed forces. It's always been a natural thing to go from the armed forces into the police, and maybe just sort of they ought to widen their recruitment circle a little.
Well, I think I disagree with Nina on most of these things. I have a great deal of respect for our police and police officers. The vast majority of them are hardworking and patriotic, and they run to danger when we run away from it. So I just don't agree.
But there are too many who are...
There are always too many, but this is the most massive organisation. And, you know, the police in Northamptonshire, where I come through, I think are first class. We've got more police out on the beat catching criminals and deterring crime. I really... there's some awful people, and they've been exposed, and they've been caught, and they've been punished. So that actually means that the system does get to these people.
Well, in the end, possibly. But you look at the character, was it Derek Carrick, I think his
Yeah,
name is? 48 alleged rapes, 9 occasions when he was investigated and then just sort of, they said, OK, carry on with your job.
I wonder, and this is the Met Police, if I understand this right. I think the Police and Crime Commissioner is the Mayor of London. What were they doing? Were they more worried about woke parades and getting that sort of thing, or were they actually looking at basic policing and what was happening within the force? Now, someone's going to have an inquiry and look at this, but I don't think we should take the Met Police and say that's what's happening all over the country either, because
why not?
Because I don't think that is the case. And the question is, why is the Met Police underperforming? And we have these dreadful things that you're talking about. But I go back. The vast majority of Met Police are really honourable people doing great job.
I agree with that, but there are too many of these so-called one-offs happening at the moment.
And what was the Commissioner doing? What was the Police and Crime Commissioner doing? And if I was the Home Secretary, I'd set up an inquiry.
Darren Jones.
If I'm honest, I'm slightly troubled by the nature of the discussion so far, because I don't think it's right to suggest that somebody based on their level of pay or whether they've been in the army is a kind of profile for this type of activity. I don't think it's right to say that if an organisation is putting some resources into celebrating the rights of LGBT people, that they can't get these things right. I think fundamentally it's the same problem in any organisation. Look, we've seen this in Parliament as well over the years. You just need a system in place that allows victims to get independent advice and support, where people know that there is a robust, independent process in place and that there are consequences if you choose to act in this way. The consequences of that meaning, losing your job, criminal prosecution, ending up in prison. And I think if people knew that they worked in an organisation where these issues were taken seriously, where there was a robust process, where there will be consequences for their actions, you would see less people thinking like it's okay to behave in these ways, and then, these issues escalating into more serious crimes.
Justine?
Well, I tend to agree with a lot of that, and I think the concern for me as a woman in London is that it's the police that you want to feel are keeping you safe. And yet, I have to say, the fact that it might even cross your mind about going somewhere with a police officer, I never thought that would be something that would pop into my mind. And yet that's exactly what happened with Sarah Everard. So the very people that you are able apparently to trust have been too often the people who it feels it's not just that you can't, it's just that you shouldn't. It's worse than that. And so I hugely respect the police as well. And I think one of the biggest tragedies of this for me is how destabilising this must be for the wider Met, which is full of thousands of people who tirelessly keep our streets safe. But it is absolutely crucial for that rotten group that's in the Met that they are absolutely cleared out. And I've got a lot of respect for Sir Mark Rowley, actually. And I think there's been a lot of chopping and changing, it feels, in the Met. It feels like it's slightly lurched from one crisis to the next over a number of years, and we now need to allow them to get a grip. I'm all for a review looking at some of the details around this, but I personally would like to see more action faster in relation to what we can do in the meantime on disciplinary proceedings and making sure that the public have some trust that if there is a certain level of evidence that a particular officer might be, sorry, I keep hitting my paper here, making a noise, but if there's a certain amount of evidence against a particular officer, that actually they shouldn't be out on the beat. And I think the thing that really staggered me was that Derek Carrick was only removed from his role now, today.
I couldn't believe
And
that.
it's been paid in full up to
Almost,
now.
if you were able to take some early decisions on at least having the public have it, some level of trust in the police, whilst you got to the more fundamental solutions on how to deal with this, the processes and all of that, I think that would be, for me, a sensible approach to take.
Robert in Norwich says, Iain, that was a slur on ex-forces people joining the police. I'm surprised at you. Do you have evidence that ex-forces are more prone to misbehaviour than civilians? As I said it, I kind of regretted the way I put it. What I was actually doing was sort of quoting Rebecca Reed from The Telegraph, who sat in Darren Jones's seat last night. That was a point that she was making, saying that there are far too many people who are recruited to the police through means or through who might have a background of this, what you called, Nina, toxic masculinity. Now, obviously, not every member of the armed forces is in that position. A lot of people who come out of the armed forces have PTSD, and I think those were the people that she was talking about. But you're right. My words were very, very clumsy, and I regret that. Right, we'll come on to more questions in just a moment. It's 8:45.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
Alex says, I was watching the Biz Select Committee earlier, thinking Darren Jones would be great on Cross Question. I turn on the radio, and what do I find? If anyone wants tomorrow's lottery numbers,
Can you let me know? That'd be great.
Right, let's go to another question. It's from Ulf in Hamburg. Hello, Ulf.
Good evening, panel. Moin moin, Iain. According to the Telegraph, you will rejoin the EU sooner or later. Do you think that's true, or do you think the sunlit uplands are within reach?
Well, this refers to the editorial in today's Daily Telegraph, which up to today has been a staunch Brexit supporting newspaper. And it says the Conservatives have made such a hash of Brexit that it's now unsalvageable, and Britain eventually choosing to rejoin the EU is almost inevitable as a result. Well, if it's in Her Majesty's Daily Telegraph, Peter Bone, it must be true.
Well, I don't know what he was drinking before he wrote that, whoever wrote it. I mean, that's completely wrong. I mean, I was looking at the figures. I think we're saving £18 billion a year by not being in the EU.
GDP down by 4%, food prices up by what?
We can put in
10%?
Which we can put into the NHS. We stop the free movement of people.
350 million a week.
Hang on.
It always happens. Remainers always like to shout down the good news about Brexit. So let's just remind you again. No, just £18 billion that you would be paying to the EU, which is in the NHS, each and every year. You've ended the free movement of people. We make our own laws in our own country, judged by our own judges. That's what we promised, and that's what we've delivered.
The free movement of people. You think that's a good thing? You ended the free movement of people?
Yes, I do.
Well, I'm afraid I disagree strongly with you.
But I don't think you voted for Brexit.
Of course I didn't vote for
there we go.
Peter, free movement of people, obviously we have lots of labour shortages in all sorts of different sectors of our economy, which we might not have had we still got free movement of people.
That was the Remainer line. Let's import cheap labour from abroad and depress wages in this country. I want to see wages in this country go up. I want to see our people employed. But, you know, those Remainers, I mean, remember Labour Party, I remember on platforms where they wanted these big companies to make more money by importing cheap labour. Surely.
No.
But that's what you argue for.
I think it's unhelpful to talk about Remainers and Brexiteers. Can we not, the vote was a long time ago. Can we just talk about people and who have different views? Once you start, labelling people, we've gone beyond that, surely. We have to look at it in a pragmatic way. I mean, I think it makes sense. There was a column in the Times, or Sunday Times, I think, that's a few days ago that said that Brexit was a complete disaster, and that at some point...
It must be true then.
No, I'm just saying you say the Telegraph says one thing and the Times also says almost the same thing. There has got to be some kind of recognition that very little has gone right since Brexit in this country. There really hasn't. We
came out on January the 31st, 2020, 2 months before the pandemic started. So you could argue that a lot of the difficulties that the economy's got at the moment, which many European economies have as well, similar to us, are as a result of the pandemic rather than Brexit.
So of course the pandemic didn't help, and the war in Ukraine does not help. But still, the fact of the matter is we have so many areas where we need the free movement of people. You need
immigration. What we ended was the free movement of people. We can bring people into this country that we want to bring in, and we can bring them in from all over the world. That's why ending the free movement.
But why you say that? That's a theory. But in practical terms,
we have a points-based immigration system now.
It hasn't. Well, it's not.
Look how many more
it's
people
not helped us. It's not helped
gone
us.
up.
Our care homes, our hospitals are starved of staff.
But Peter is right that net immigration has gone up.
It has gone up, but it hasn't helped.
You can't have it both ways, can you?
You can have it both ways. You can have it both ways because the people who were the kind of backbone almost of our hospitality industry, of our hospitals, of our national health system, have gone, and they have not been replaced.
Let's bring in Justine.
Well, I think the reality is we are out of the EU. The challenge is making Brexit Britain work effectively. And I think what we all need to see and have is a stronger strategy for how you do that transition to being a version of Britain that is more reliant on its own talent. That's, for me, why levelling up absolutely matters. I think it's long overdue that we come to this. Frankly, from my perspective, it's why the education issue matters. I think for business, there's a real frustration around levels of regulation, and I think that needs to have some certainty over it sooner rather than later.
We're doing that tomorrow in Parliament, actually. We're looking at that. Yeah.
And I think the final area where there needs to be a resolution is, of course, around Northern Ireland, and really making sure that communities there that are really concerned about that impact do have some real solutions. And actually, for me, there are some components of how you move forward on this and actually can make it more stable. I think the big challenge is if we're not able to do that, actually. And so that's what I've always wanted to see, really, is a stronger, more detailed plan, Iain, on how we're actually going to make this work, recognising it's not going to happen overnight.
In terms of Ulf's question, and I didn't put this to you, Nina, do you think it's inevitable that Britain will eventually choose to rejoin the EU?
No, I don't think it is. I think we will. I think we will have to have some working relationships. But actually, fundamentally, this issue of take back control resonated with lots of people because they did not feel enough in control of their lives. And from my perspective, with all the work I do on social mobility, it's about being in a version of Britain where effort and reward really feel like
suggest that they are less in control of their lives. With inflation the way it is, they can't afford to do anything. Liz Truss's disaster mortgage.
European country. It's not just us.
But we are doing it far worse.
No, we're not.
We are.
See, this is a complete and utter lie.
We are.
When you look at Germany, when you look at the Netherlands, when you look at most European countries, and we're about the middle. We're not doing worse than everybody else. Why do you perpetuate this myth?
Because we are.
No, but just look at the figures, and you'll see that we're actually not.
We have. I mean, can you explain to me what Liz Truss did?
No.
Exactly.
Darren Jones.
There you go. So, I mean,
Germany it's got nothing to do with
it
that.
has a lot to do with all sorts of things.
We have to bring Darren in.
We haven't really had a government last year.
Well, that's true. Darren.
I mean, look, to answer the caller's question, I don't think is inevitable, because one of the tragedies of Brexit is that we actually had a pretty good deal when we were part of it. We weren't part of the euro, we were not in Schengen, we had lots of vetoes and exemptions from policies that we didn't want. If we try to rejoin from a position of weakness, which is what we'd be doing if we did it anytime soon, I doubt very much that we'd be able to negotiate any of those carve-outs in the way that the British people want. What I think is more likely is that the European Union over time will probably change the way in which it engages with third countries. And there may be new ways, I think Macron calls them concentric political circles or something. It's probably a poor translation. But I think there'll be new ways for third countries to engage with the EU on the basis that we want to do so. I think that's more likely.
Right. I need a 30-second answer on this question from Chris in Brecon. Who are the Conservative and Labour parties these days? I'm a centrist voter type, but I do not recognise this Tory party anymore. So essentially, what do the parties stand for, and are they communicating it clearly enough? Justine Greening, start with you. Your former colleague Claire Perry-O'Neill, she quit the Tory party because of what Chris has basically said this week. Are you tempted to do the same?
No. I think I've certainly always been clear what I think the Tory party stands for, and that is equality of opportunity built on the basis of a strong economy and well-managed public finances. And that's what I want to see a Conservative government do. And I think the further away, in a sense, it gets from delivering on those objectives for very different reasons, the less chance it has of getting elected.
Darren?
Well, we have been talking about a greener, fairer, more prosperous future for the country, and I think that underpins our commitment to recognising the net zero journey we have to take, that we need to tackle inequality in our country, and we need to get back to a position where the economy is successful, is growing, is generating tax, so we can fund our public services.
What does it say about Labour, though, that Rosie Duffield got heckled by fellow Labour MPs in the Commons today while explaining why she supported the government's veto of the Gender Recognition Act?
I wasn't in the chamber, so I don't know what happened.
You're busy being rude to Simon Thompson.
I was asking him important questions. But look, I mean, if that did happen, clearly that shouldn't happen, and it's not a type of behaviour I'd condone in any direction.
Peter?
Well, I mean, everything's going really well at the moment. No,
is it?
No, you mustn't do irony on radio.
I'm so reassured.
No, the truth of the matter is, clearly we're not doing very well, because we wouldn't be 25 points behind in the polls. But I agree with Justine, that's what we've got to get back to, those sort of aspirational Tories that we need. We were many, many years ago on the same course when we were first put through as Conservative MPs. And I don't think our views on what the Conservative Party should be doing, but we've gone off from that, and there is our supporters are saying, well, actually, you're actually taxing record amounts of money. That's the sort. We've got to go back to being what Conservatives are, and everybody knows, of course, Labour will make a complete mess of the economy. But if they're saying we're making a mess of the economy, you might as well let the other side of it.
Nina thinks they should be given the opportunity.
Well, they should be given the opportunity, although I haven't voted Labour since the Iraq War. I find it astonishing that people can still talk about the Conservative Party and sound fiscal policy in the same sentence without sniggering. I mean, the Conservatives have crashed the economy, basically. We have no money. Inflation is extraordinary. And what this government has done, you were sitting there sniggering, but in fact...
I'm not trying to interrupt. I'm trying to behave.
No, well, fair enough. But, the country actually is crying out. We're on our knees, and 13 years are far too long. That's it.
OK. Very brief final fun question from Tom in Leeds. One-word answers from you all, please. With the Ineos owner now trying to buy Manchester United just because he's a fan and he can afford it, what national institution would you buy if you could? Who wants to kick off?
Ooh.
While the others rapidly try to think of something.
I'm just, my instant reaction is I'm going for the Royal Gardens at Kew to make sure they're protected for forever and a day.
How very British.
They do brilliant stuff.
Darren, you're looking a bit doubtful.
I'm normally quite quick. I don't know if I'm getting older.
Royal Mail?
Royal Mail, there you are. For our posties, I would buy it on their behalf.
Nina?
Thank you for helping me.
Oh, they're already not. I mean, any museum I'd be happy with.
Peter?
I would like Spurs, perhaps, like West Ham.
In that case, I'll go for
You're
Rotherham
welcome
United.
to Spurs. Thank you very much to all of you. Darren Jones, Justine Greening, Peter Bone and Nina Myskow. We'll have another cross question for you tomorrow. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to talk about the fact that the Home Office civil servants are being told not to use the word mate or the word homosexual as part of a presentation on gendered language. Personally, I would like to see all of the people who conduct these courses, who come up with these ridiculous ideas, to be sacked, save millions of pounds and pay people extra, because they don't deserve to be paid 70, 80, 90,000 pounds a year to come up with guff like this. Or do they? Or do we all need to be told how we should speak, what words we're allowed to use or not? Aren't we intelligent enough to work it out for ourselves? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Downing Street says widespread strikes at the start of next month will cause significant disruption across the country.